G'day, Richard here. Before we get to the show, I want to let you know about an opportunity. Have you ever wanted to participate in a scientific study? Are you, or someone you know, an Aussie, aged between 18 and 70, who's type 1 diabetic and interested in making changes to your diet for improved health and well-being? Our guest for this classic episode, Jessica Turton, is recruiting for a study at the University of Sydney. If you qualify, it will include 6 diet sessions over Zoom with a practicing dietitian, 1 diabetes education session with a credentialed diabetes educator, as well as health assessments including blood tests taken at multiple time points, plus medical supervision and support. The eligibility criteria are that you have to be a type 1 with diagnosis at least 6 months ago, a current HbA1c of greater than 7, you have to have an Android or iOS phone, be able to speak and understand fluent English, and be willing to make changes to your diet and required insulin adjustments with professional support. It has to be limited to Australia, unfortunately, but I know some Aussies listen to this show. The link to the recruitment is in the show notes. Places are limited, so if you're interested, go check it out. Okay, let's get Carl in and we'll start the show. Hi, I'm Richard Morris from Canberra, Australia. In 2014, I was very sick with complications from type 2 diabetes. After taking the dietary advice of the Australian Diabetes Association, I became more diabetic. I did some research which led me to the ketogenic diet. Spoiler alert, I reversed my type 2 diabetes by drastically reducing my carbohydrate intake and increasing my consumption of healthy fats. In 2016, I was determined to help my buddy Carl by showing him what I did and the science behind it.
Hey man, that's me. I'm Carl Franklin from the United States. I also used to be type 2 diabetic, but not quite as severely as Richard. I devoured all the information Richard sent me, and after a mutual friend went keto to address prostate cancer, I also went on the ketogenic diet. That was in February of 2016. By April, I was in full swing reversing my diabetes.
We're not doctors and we don't give medical advice. We're just a couple of dudes on the internet who reverse their diabetes by following a ketogenic diet.
Right. We just want to share our experiences and what we know about the science behind the ketogenic diet.
Yeah, so we started this podcast to chronicle Carl's journey and to provide solid information to those curious about this dietary lifestyle.
Right. And now we have over 200 podcast episodes, some of which have been downloaded hundreds of thousands of times.
Yeah.
And after failing miserably on Facebook, we moved our online community to the Ketogenic forums, where tens of thousands of people share their experiences.
We also founded an annual ketogenic festival called Keto Fest. Carl and I are both software developers, so we find ourselves at software conferences several times a year, and we tend to gravitate towards the conversations that happen in the hallways at conferences. Sure, the talks are great, but it's the community that we enjoy the most.
Speaking of conferences, I'm not going to NDC next week.
In Norway?
Yeah, because I can't get there. They're shut down.
Wow.
They're not shut down, but there was a loophole. I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'm not going to Norway.
Okay.
Anyway, Keto Fest is a conference to discuss the latest research of ketogenic diets, but it's also a festival celebrating the ketogenic lifestyle. And, we're currently planning Keto Fest for October 2022.
Nice.
If you'd like to be notified when tickets are available, please add your name to the list at ketofest.com.
So, Carl, what is a ketogenic diet?
It's a diet where instead of burning sugar and starch for energy, our cells preferentially burn fat. That produces molecules called ketones that our bodies use for fuel.
Right. Our main molecular fuels are glucose, which we make from carbohydrates, and fatty acids, which we make from fat. Our cells have 2 modes. In one, they burn glucose and make fat, and in the other, they burn fatty acids and make ketones.
But you don't have to eat a high-fat diet to be ketogenic, right?
Well, when you're starting out, you may have to, but then in a few weeks, as you become better adapted to burning fat for energy, when all of your calories come from fatty acids, the amount that you need to eat becomes coupled to satiety, which integrates not only the variable amount of energy your body needs to run every day, but also the amount of fat that can be drawn down from storage.
So how much do we need to restrict carbohydrates in order to get into that state?
Well, that depends. Some of us who are metabolically disordered need to get below 20 grams a day. And somebody who's quite metabolically flexible can probably eat as much as 100 grams a day.
What about stuff like protein, minerals, and essential cofactors like vitamins and essential fats?
Well, you need from 1 to 1.5 grams of protein for every kilogram of lean mass. Beyond that, you just waste excess by turning it into energy instead of using fatty acids. As for the other essential nutrients, if you're eating fatty meats or eggs plus leafy green vegetables, you'll get most of those because those organisms that made those foods have already concentrated essential cofactors.
Ketogenic diets are varied and delicious. They can be vegetarian or carnivore, home-cooked or takeout, hot cuisine.
Hot cuisine!
Or just bacon and eggs.
As long as your carbohydrates are low enough.
And if you're an absolute beginner, check out our Starting Keto episode for more information at start.2keto.com. Well, let's check in. Richard, how have you been lately?
I saw an interesting video on YouTube from a guy with Asperger's about what it's like to be inside somebody on the autism spectrum. And, you know, the view from the inside out, I was resonating with every single point.
Really?
Yeah, things like, you feel like an alien. You're not quite like other people, not in a vain way, but in a, are you sure I'm supposed to be here way?
Huh.
And it's like you're never quite sure if you're humaning quite correctly. Social settings are fatiguing. So after a few hours of Keto Fest, I have to go sit in a darkened room to recharge my social batteries for like 30 minutes and then I'm good to go again. Sensory stimuli can be off-putting. Like I can never remember song lyrics because I'm enjoying the music so much.
Yeah, you mentioned that before.
Yeah, it's just this weird thing about my brain. And also every day I wear the same brand of black T-shirt and the same brand of sunglasses, the same brand of shoes with the laces always untied but knotted in a special way so that they're not dragging. Anyway, I really
Yes, let's hear it for the black uniform.
I think I may be on the autism spectrum, pending a professional diagnosis, of course. I'm not sure what it means, if anything. I suspect that half of my friends are going to be saying to themselves, of course you're on the bloody autism spectrum, and the other half are going to be saying, no, you're not. What are you talking about?
It kind of makes sense that you hired Mark Miller because he's Asperger's.
Also, he has Asperger's as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know, but it was I found it very interesting. So that was my epiphany for the week. Well, how's your week been, Carl?
Pretty good. Feeling in control and feeling good. Thanksgiving was just me and my wife, and I made a beer can chicken in the oven. I made really amazing stuffing with Fox Hill Kitchens or Julie Bagels, Irby croutons.
Nice.
My girls came by in the evening for a visit. That was fun. We played some cards, and I shared a flourless chocolate torte also from Fox Hill Kitchens. And I used Keto Chow 3 or 4 times, I think 4 times last week.
Excellent.
And my favorite flavor this week is orange mango. It's good. You know what I make? Sometimes I make it with a little Gatorade Zero orange flavor. And instead of just water, to just give it a little extra punch, a little extra flav. That was good. Should we say something about the long show last week?
Yeah, sorry about that. That was kind of my fault. A listener complained to Carl that we weren't publishing new content, just our old shows.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Are we not talking enough? Here.
So we made an extra long show that went for over 100 minutes of dense content in his honour. Look, this week I'm going to republish another of my favourite episodes as a palate cleanser. This one's a good one, for a change.
Right.
My interview with Jessica Turton, dietitian and scientist. And we're also going to rebroadcast the recipe from that episode, not because I'm lazy, but because when I was listening to that episode while researching what episode I should republish, I listened to the recipe and my mouth started watering.
Oh, yeah.
Beef cheeks with beurre Monte gravy. Look, that's a recipe that deserves to be republished. So
that's good stuff.
I'm going to curate that for you guys.
All right. Well, I guess that brings us to a little segment we call Well, I went to iTunes because that's the only way that I can get the comments is to install a Windows application.
Stupid Apple. So these are the Apple reviews, right?
Did I mention I'm a little angry because I can't just copy and paste them out of iTunes? But anyway, this is from September 27th, 2019.
That's my birthday.
No kidding.
It is, yeah.
All right. I didn't know the day, but I know when it pops up on my calendar, today is Richard Morris's birthday. So very good. And the Spearmaster says, I'm up to my, oh, by the way, it is a 5-star review. I'm up to my 1 year, 1 meal a day ketoversary, and I've never felt better or more in control of my diet. So much of that thanks goes to Carl, Carrie, and Richard for giving me the info I needed and radicalizing me in a good way to keep up with it.
But you're welcome. Sorry about the radicalization, but
no, that's a compliment. I like that because you got to get radical because everybody's got their head in the clouds, right?
Yeah, they do.
Carl, there's definitely a correlation here with me starting to listen to your podcast about a year ago, but I'll leave the causation to the experts.
Correlation is not causation.
Right. Sorry for taking a year to write you all a review. Much gratitude, Rob. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Well, look, people, these reviews, we're very grateful. Thank you very much for
Absolutely.
Writing them. We have so many positive reviews that, if ever I'm feeling down, looking at the reviews from people who've listened to the show and enjoyed it is a great pick-me-up. And the other thing that it does is that reviews on the Apple system will introduce new listeners to the show. So we're grateful that people. It doesn't matter. Look, if you don't like the show, do a 1-star review. We're going to call you out as a vegan on the show, but
we won't. Come on.
But it doesn't matter what kind of review it is. The more reviews, the more podcast is introduced to new people, and it's kind of important for us to get the word out that. Not for our own vanity, but really to try and get to more type 2 diabetics. So this is an important. So thank you for those people who do that.
By the way, I would like to apologize to vegans everywhere for my behavior last week. We talked about this, and I cracked a few jokes at vegans' expense, and Peter's like, I'm so over that. This is outside the recording, right? He's like. Yeah. I'm so over that. I'm not, Che Calvera anymore. Yeah. And he's totally right. You can be a vegan and do keto. I mean, it's hard, but you can do that. So
I did it for a month and I really enjoyed it. So I'd have no trouble. If I had to be vegan. I could do it, and I'd have to be over lactose, so I'd have to have dairy and eggs. But
right. Right. Anyway, I just wanted you to know that this is a vegan-friendly podcast from now on.
Yes, it is.
It should have been the whole time, and I'm sorry about that. So, Richard, you want to tell us what we're going to listen to here?
Sure. So I'm going to replay a podcast that we did quite a while back. It was episode 112, and it was Jessica Turton, dietitian and scientist. Jess is a dietitian in Australia who's studying her PhD at University of Sydney. Now, when I started this keto journey of mine over 7.5 years ago, all the dietitians told me that I had to eat a calorie-controlled diet for weight loss to slow the progression of my type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And the diet had to be low in fat, especially saturated fat for cardiovascular health. And I needed to get protein from plants, mostly lean poultry and fish. And the diet had to be high in whole grains and fruit.
Can I interrupt you here for 1 second?
Mm-hmm.
You're reminding me of an interaction I had just 2 days ago with somebody, an old friend who was waiting for a bus outside of the shopping center. And I said, hey, how's it going? And he says, oh, I had a massive coronary heart attack.
Oh.
And he said, I'm on a strict diet, no meat, no fat, all vegetables and lean proteins. And my doctor put me on this diet, so I can't, I can't eat burgers and stuff, whatever.
Oh, no.
Steaks. Just made me sad, and it made me remember that the world hasn't caught up yet.
Nah.
Yeah. Well, anyway, back to your story.
Yeah, so anyway, I was being told by all kinds of dietitians, the same way as your friend with the dietary advice for his heart disease, that my diet had to be Australian dietary guidelines. Every single dietitian, certified diabetes educator that I saw when I was first diagnosed was a dietitian, independent dietitians I consulted with about diet, even the website of the Australian Diabetes Organisation was all in lockstep with this dogma.
Wow.
And here's the thing. I was just about to embark on a diet that was almost the polar opposite, a low-carb diet with no grains, plenty of red meat, all my energy coming from fatty acids, and I was understandably concerned. Am I putting myself at risk of killing myself with this weird diet that all the subject matter experts warned against?
Right.
Well, it turns out that diet reversed my type 2 diabetes, and I've been non-diabetic now for over 7 years, and my lipid biomarkers are all excellent. So,
Huzzah!
Huzzah.
Huzzah!
So I was predisposed to regard all dietitians with some serious side eye. And then I met Jessica Turton at a low-carb conference, and I found out that not all dietitians were like that. Jess is a food nerd's food nerd. Food is her driving passion from a young age, but it wasn't always a healthy relationship with food. She cycled between anorexia and bulimia through school and into uni, and then she discovered low-carb diets just as she was about to start a master's degree in nutrition. And that diet healed her relationship with food. Look, I'll let her tell her story, but let me just say that I find it inspiring when someone like Jessica challenges the dogma based on following the evidence and puts their neck on the line. This is one of my favourite podcast interviews because she is brave and smart, but also gives us an interesting insight into how caloric restriction malarkey can screw you up.
Oh, yeah.
So here's my first interview with Jessica Turton, dietitian and scientist.
Cool.
Okay, so I'm here with Jessica Turton. We're in low-carb Perth still. We've done a whole bunch of interviews from here. And Jessica did a presentation yesterday about some research that she's doing. She is a dietitian and she's also a PhD student at the University of Sydney with Kieran Rooney.
Yes, Dr. Kieran Rooney.
Yes, and he's a well-known low-carb researcher in Australia, isn't he?
He is. Well, he's how I got into all of this myself. So he is actually a lecturer at the University of Sydney and he's the unit of study coordinator for the exercise and sports science degree, which was my bachelor degree. So that's where I learned all about the role of insulin and fuel utilization, and I really sort of delved into carbohydrate restriction. So it's been awesome.
Because he is himself carbohydrate restricted. He is on a low-carb, healthy fat diet.
Yes.
Did you know he was when he was teaching you?
No. So at the time, so this was my first year of my 5-year degree, and I didn't know anything about low carb back then. But I was interested in weight management and weight loss.
Right.
So when I learned about, all you need to do is just reduce insulin and then fat burning can be turned on, I was like, well, that just seems so logical. And so I dived into it and I learned more about Kieran because I think at this time he had a few videos online and he was on a few podcasts.
Right.
So I learned more about him, but, I was doing my nutrition of dietetics degree, which was a separate degree to the exercise and sports science one. So I sort of went on my own journey first. And then when I eventually came back to doing my master's, I got back in touch with him again because I knew he was, so knowledgeable in this world and I knew he was doing a lot of research in this world as well. And that's something I was so interested in. I just dived into the research, found it incredible, as you would know, especially for someone studying dietetics, right? So,
well, that's interesting. Dietetics is such an evidence-based practice, and you were seeing the evidence that was leading you to the conclusion of a low carbohydrate diet, which ironically is something that's considered antithetical to the dietetic practice. So that's interesting because that must have taken a lot of personal risk on your part to observe that things didn't seem to be lining up the way that you taught them.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about me, I suppose, is that so I did my 3-year undergraduate degree, which was exercise and sports science. So there was very little nutrition in that. Gotcha. It was very science-based. Yeah. And that's where I got into low carb. And I actually went on my own journey with low carb and found out how amazing it was for weight management, blood sugar regulation, energy, mentality, all those sorts of amazing things. So I was so deep into low carb, and then I had to do my Masters of Nutrition and Dietetics. So it was a struggle in a way. Yeah, because I was one of those people that just questioned everything. So, I really enjoyed my master's degree. Like, I loved it, but I was always questioning. So, every time we learned about something, I was just like, well, why? Where's the evidence?
Right.
But I found this.
Yeah.
And I just don't know if my questioning approach was very supported.
Right.
So that's really what caused me to reach out to Kieran Rooney. I reached out to him again in my first year of my master's. So this is 4 years after that lecture with him.
Right.
And we really got talking, and he was really supportive throughout my master's degree. Because I just don't know. Like, I know low carb is so evidence-based. And this is what I was talking about in my talk yesterday. There is so much evidence for low-carb nutrition for obesity and type 2 diabetes, but I just don't think the dietitians are aware of it.
Right.
I just don't think they are. I was pulled up a few times during my degree, and people would, the lecturers would even say to me, there's no evidence for what you're talking about, Jessica. There's no evidence for low-carb nutrition. And I was just like, what are you talking about?
Right.
I've seen it. Like, I'm not making this stuff up. I got into this through the evidence.
Were you able to produce the evidence for them, and were they able to? Did they recant, or did they?
No, I sort of took a slightly quieter approach eventually. So at the beginning, I was very much like, stating my thoughts and questioning, and it wasn't well received.
Right.
So I sort of just went a little bit quiet, and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do this degree. I'm going to take out as much as I can, because what a lot of people don't realize is we learn so much detail. Like, we go into so much detail about the science behind vitamins and minerals and medications and all these types of medical conditions. Like, It's a very intense degree, so I don't want to undermine that at all.
No.
I mean, there is a part where you learn about the Australian Dietary Guidelines, but that's like the first couple of weeks.
Sure.
So that's where I was really questioning things. But as I said in my talk yesterday, the Australian Dietary Guidelines don't apply to people with medical conditions.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's interesting, and that's the fault line where we can start to maybe, hopefully, see some change, because clearly we have now the Verta study that shows that it would be a malpractice not to offer a ketogenic diet to people who are type 2 diabetic, because like 90% of people, 90% of the subjects on that study were off their medication. It's just outstanding, and 60% had seen a reversal in their diabetes, and so almost that study just by itself is sufficient to say that this should be available at least to diabetics. Well, if diabetics are not considered to be normal, then and the ADG, the Australian Dietary Guidelines, is based around only healthy, normal people, then clearly there's an opportunity for a new dietary guidelines available to diabetics, uniquely to diabetics, which could allow a ketogenic or low carb diet. So
yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, I did a scholarship looking into a lot of the studies behind whole grain intake and cardiovascular disease, and these were the studies that are used as the evidence base for the dietary guidelines.
Right.
And when you look through those studies, they filter out everybody who's got insulin resistance, everyone who's over BMI 25, so they're filtering out all the people that make up the bulk of our population. Like, let's be honest.
85% of us have this, are on this continuum. Yeah.
Exactly. So, depending on when the study was designed, but still you sort of look through that and you're just like, well, that's great for somebody that's under BMI 25 and completely healthy.
Right.
And to be honest, like, I don't know if this is because I'm a dietitian or what, and the sort of people I surround myself with, but I don't really know anybody that doesn't have a risk factor like hypertension or high cholesterol
it's got to be
whatever.
Like 90-95%. I mean, certainly only 1 in 20 people is perfectly healthy, really. So,
well, you know what I thought as well? I actually wouldn't have been included in one of those studies because my LDL is very high. So they would have kicked me right out.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So you actually have a family history of diabetes, don't you?
Yes, a very strong one.
Right.
All my grandparents had or have diabetes. Type 2. So 3 of my grandparents, so my mother's dad doesn't. So essentially it's very strong in my family. But I think the most interesting side is probably my dad's side. So my grandmother, she had peripheral neuropathy when she was very young.
Right.
So I think in her 60s she got it, and she didn't have diabetes at the time.
Yeah.
So she's, been on a crazy journey herself. weight gain and diabetes and any health condition under the sun. And so obviously my dad was predisposed to those types of things. And my dad's brother, so my uncle, actually died of a heart attack when he was in his late 30s.
Wow. Yeah.
So very young.
Yeah.
So it's very strong in the family. And my dad, he actually was on an interesting journey, and he is one of the reasons that I'm so passionate about this and so passionate about diabetes. So he was, he's been overweight for quite some time, and he knew, maybe sort of 10 years ago, he's like, something's not right. He was noticing he was very thirsty. He was noticing that he was getting a lot of weight around the middle, despite what he would do. So he was always going on a diet, always trying something new. Like, hats off to him. He does so much research and actually really looks into the science behind things and goes, yep, that's cool. I'm going to do it, Yeah. And he's tried so many diets over the years. And so I saw him struggling with his weight and all of those types of things. So that's one of the reasons I got into nutrition itself.
Okay.
But then what really caused me to be passionate about diabetes was when he ended up having a heart attack. So I think it was 2 years ago now, he ended up having a heart attack. Yeah. It was actually around the time he was getting married. So at the wedding, he was noticing he had some chest pain. And I mean, at the time, he thought he was healthy because he'd been to the doctor every single year saying, I think I've got diabetes. Like, I think something's wrong with me. So he was pretty much telling the doctor, like, look for diabetes, check it. I'm pretty sure I've got it.
But his glucose at that point wasn't elevated enough
His glucose was
to
normal.
meet the diagnostic criteria.
So they just did like a fasting glucose, right?
Right.
Fasting glucose, and was like, you're fine, don't worry. And I didn't know anything about, insulin testing at the time. Yeah. So I didn't even know my dad was going through a lot of this. And then, so he ended up having a heart attack. And this was within 6 months or 8 months of seeing a doctor who told him he was fine.
Wow.
Like, this could have been prevented. He was going to the doctor every single year. Yeah. I mean, if only there was some better testing that was done, like an oral glucose tolerance test with insulin, would have got this ages ago. Yeah. And I mean, his brother had a heart attack in his late 30s. Right. Why wasn't my dad getting all the testing that he could possibly get?
Some people just can have a heart attack out of the blue, and it could be a totally healthy person have a heart attack out of the blue. So it is something that can happen with no other criteria. But for the most part, somebody who's diabetic may not their glucose may not rise for 20 or 30 years after the beginning of the process, but their insulin is going up right from the get-go.
Oh, yeah.
And some of us, some of us get it in the womb. Insulin is a big molecule, can't get across the placental barrier, but the glucose can. So if mum is carrying a lot of glucose, the fetus is now developing, and their pancreas is having to produce adult amounts of insulin.
Yes.
And so they get an early start. So And so, you can pick that up with this craft test. You can do a craft test and pick these kinds of things up, as you know.
Yeah.
But it's just incredible. And then all of the things he's saying, that the neuropathy, your grandma's neuropathy that came through.
Well, he had it too. He had it when he was going to the doctor. He's like, I've got peripheral neuropathy. Yeah. So he had all the warning signs. I mean, he had all the warning signs of diabetes. He didn't have the warning signs of like insulin resistance. He was far gone past that, and they still didn't pick it up.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when he had his heart attack, so he had the stent and everything, and obviously he's fine, so he survived. But he had diabetes, and they found out, and sort of when they told him, he was just like, no, I don't have diabetes because I went to the doctor a few months ago. You told me I was fine. You don't just get it in 3 months.
No.
And they're like, yes, you do. Have a look at your sugars. Yeah. And they were through the roof.
Right.
And so it's really funny because my dad documents all his meals in hospital. Gosh, you should have seen what he was being fed.
Horrible, isn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
Hospital meals?
Yeah.
Yeah. Julie went to a hospital once for an operation on her sinuses, and we interviewed all of the hospitals in Canberra to find one that was willing to do a ketogenic diet. And there was only one that was willing to do a ketogenic diet.
Yes, I remember the story.
And they refused to. In the end, they refused to do it unless she was an epileptic child under the medication of a doctor. But they had somebody standing over her insisting, a big burly male nurse standing over her after her operation, making sure that she drank her orange juice and ate a sandwich.
Oh, my goodness.
And they wouldn't let her have a visitor until she did it. And she was like, she's extremely stubborn. And she was like, I'm not going to eat that.
Yeah.
And so I think she eventually ended up having to eat it. And then I had to smuggle cheese and
that's
stuff
classic.
in. So, yeah, hospital food is horrible. So he went through this whole poor bugger. Did he end up going? I guess he obviously went low carb, right?
Of course he did.
Good on him.
So he is really receptive to everything that I'm doing. So obviously when I found out all of this stuff, so I had been doing low carb myself at this time.
Right.
I hadn't really, been shouting it from the rooftops to my family, but they knew that I was doing something that was working because I was obviously losing weight and becoming healthier myself. So when I found out that this happened to my dad, he sent me, the text straight away. And I was like, oh my gosh. If my dad remembers, I literally wrote him like a 10-page dietary plan, which was basically reduced carbohydrate, because this was just after I'd spent a year between my bachelor and my master's degree, where for the whole year I was literally researching low carbohydrate nutrition. I was so stuck into everything. It was amazing. And so I sent him this plan, and because I was, he was now so invested in diet and health and nutrition, and he really wanted to improve his health, he was asking me about the science behind all of this. So he didn't want to just know about what do I eat, Jess. He wanted to know
why
the science. Yeah. And so since then, he's been a massive advocate to his friends and family too. So, with him, he has been able to lose quite a bit of weight. He's still on his journey. So, it's only been a couple of years now, and it does take a lot of time to reverse those habits. And he's seeing an amazing doctor, Dr. David Lim. Who's really supporting him through this. And it's just fantastic to see the turnaround, because, I almost think sometimes my dad could be a dietitian. Like, he's learned so much from me and so much himself that he's so educated in the science. And I think that's the key thing here. And we see that, from all the people turning up at the low carb down under events, that learning about the science behind this is what really is the driver to get people sort of interested in actually doing it. Because he knows that if he, like, for example, if he wants dessert, it's fine. He has dessert, but he does that with an informed decision, knowing his blood sugars are going to go high and knowing that he needs to maybe take some extra strategies to help them be lower the next day. So whether it's fasting after, or whether it's, planning the day appropriately so he's not having all these glucose spikes across the day. So I think it's just about making that informed decision. Some of us don't want to have, the goal isn't perfect health, you know, but it's just improved health so you can have a better quality of life. And I think that's what it's about for him.
I think that's it for me as well. I think weight loss was never a goal for me on the ketogenic diet. It was getting my glucose down, getting my insulin down, and getting my exposure to my blood vessels of insulin. And then, of course, all of the diabetic side effects, retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy, and cardiovascular disease. All of those are like vascular damage from insulin, so and potentially glucose as well. Get those two down. I really didn't care if I lost weight, to be honest.
Exactly.
Because as long as I felt good and I feel great, and I certainly have lots of energy. And I should mention, we just did a ride. We did the bridge to bridge
in Perth.
In Perth, yeah. So
how long was that again? We rode
exactly an hour and 34 seconds. So I think
it was really nice.
Yeah, it was. So, but I for me, it was never the goal was never losing weight, and so I've never been obsessed by calories in or exercise out, as a model. But since I did the start of the podcast, I've met a lot of people who've been frustrated by that whole thing. So,
well, it's interesting you say that, because that was definitely me. So, when I was in high school, essentially, I got very obsessed with calorie counting.
Right.
Very obsessed with calories in, calories out, like to the point where I was reducing calorie intake to 800 calories a day.
Wow.
And it took over my life. Like, all I saw food, I just saw food as calories, nothing else.
Right.
And I was able to lose a lot of weight, but as you heard in my talk, so yesterday when I spoke, I said that I'd lost 20 kilos since finding low carb.
Sure.
But the journey before that was it was crazy, really. And that's really what has made me so passionate about this, what's happened to my family, but what's happened to me too. Because I got lost in that calorie counting obsessive world. And I lost a lot of weight when I was in my teens.
It works. I mean, it works to lose weight, but it's not all fat that you're losing. And it's...
Well, the thing is, I became a different person, We've heard about those starvational studies, and you can imagine I was eating 800 calories a day for a long time.
That's just not your metabolic rate would have lowered and adjusted, and
that's what happened. Yeah. And I became a different person, I think, because on the days where I couldn't hit my calorie target, I was mad. I was angry. It was my life. It's all I cared about. And so sort of what followed that was me trying to go, this is ridiculous. I eventually hit that point of realization where I was like, oh my gosh, I've lost a lot of weight. I'm not healthy anymore. I've a lot of the relationships in my family life had sort of turned on its head because people didn't know how to deal with me because all I cared about was calories.
Right.
And
sounds like you make a good dietitian, though.
I would have been a great dietitian. I knew the calories in everything. Even if I had a bite of something, I would record how much calories was in that. It was obsessive. But the thing is, I ended up on that journey because I was trying to do the right thing.
Yes,
because
exactly.
I was told you have to look at calories and you have to look at calories in versus calories out.
And it makes sense because if you restrict the amount of calories that you're eating and increase the amount that are going out, in theory, the difference should be made up from body fat, and you should draw down body fat in theory.
Exactly. And, it really isn't sustainable, but I think something switched over in my mind and it became quite dangerous where I was really just obsessed with it. So it isn't sustainable, but for someone who only cared about calories and weight loss, it was in a very dangerous way. And when I hit that point of realization, I was like, I've got to stop this. I've got to gain some weight. I've got to be healthy again. It's not all about weight. And I was really lucky to hit that point of realization.
Yeah. A moment of clarity.
Clarity, exactly. About, But what followed that, because I only saw food as calories, I didn't know how to eat. I was just like... And my brain, because I was just only looking at food as a number, I didn't know what was healthy anymore. I didn't know what was going to satiate me. I didn't know what was going to fill me up. So I sort of got into a really vicious cycle of binge eating.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it was awful. It was really bad. And if anyone, out there has experienced a binge eating disorder, they'll know, it's not just like at Christmas time where, you overindulge.
Right.
That's not it. It's when you become a completely different person. Yeah. And it was a really hard time because, I'd lost all this weight and I thought I was doing a good thing, but then I couldn't find my healthy weight. I didn't know what that was. I couldn't find my healthy diet. So then I went on this journey of just having no idea how to eat.
Right.
And that's how I put on all my weight. So I spoke at the talk how I said I've lost 20 kilos with low carb, high fat.
Yeah.
But that was after a journey of putting on about 35 kilos.
Wow.
So from my smallest point, I went up to about 86 or 88 kilos from binge eating and the sort of after effects of what calorie counting can do to you.
Right.
So that's why I'm so against calorie counting.
Yeah.
But it's also why I'm so passionate about LCHF. Because when I was at my heaviest point, and I'm quite tall, so I didn't look so overweight. It was quite well distributed.
You're tall. It looks like you could carry a lot more weight and still look slim.
Oh, yeah. So people are like, whoa, 20 kilos. But on me, I was definitely overweight. My BMI was probably 29, almost 30. But we were just talking this morning about how that doesn't matter, but still, just for people out there.
Well, my BMI is around about 30 as well. So
Yeah, so I wasn't excessive, but I was carrying extra weight. And when you consider that my weight before that was about 48 kilos, right? So that's a big jump.
Yes.
So when I was going into my first year of uni to learn to be a dietitian, and I was overweight.
Right.
And I didn't know how to eat.
That's not a good start.
It's not a good
and
start.
Not knowing how to eat and really being confused about food in general.
I was so confused. Yeah. It wasn't even funny.
So do you think you went into dietetics then looking for some answers for that?
It's really funny because I feel that I'm very grateful for this, but I knew since I was in year 9 that I wanted to be a dietitian.
Wow. Real vocation then.
Yeah. So I've always been, I started the whole calorie counting thing because I loved food and nutrition from a very young age, but it became dangerous for me through calorie counting and through the sort of I guess, standard approach to weight loss. So it became really dangerous. And so that's why I knew I had to find an alternative way. And so when I was sitting in that biochemistry lecture in my first year, you know, probably like eating some carbohydrate at the time. And I learned about this. I was like, this just makes so much sense.
Right.
So I learned about insulin and I learned about how to access your fat stores, which I hadn't been able to do. And so I just dived in and started doing LCHF for myself. And that's how I was able to lose the weight and be the weight I am now.
And also to find satiety. I mean, you didn't know your satiety point, and LCHF is a really good way, because the nice thing about LCHF is that satiety tells you how much you should eat, and it feels good to be satiated. So
it was so good. And you know what? For someone who had a very big problem with binge eating, so I would eat food and just have no idea when to stop. And when I started doing higher fat eating, I was actually like, I can't eat anymore. I was actually, my brain was telling me, you're eating food, you can stop now. Whereas for years before that, I'd never had that signal.
I don't either. I'm obviously I have the same problem you do, the familial hyperinsulinemia. And I back in the day, I used to be able to eat two large pizzas by myself, and you know, I didn't have an off switch. And if I eat now a fathead pizza, 2 slices. It used to be 2 large pizzas. Now 2 slices, and I'm done. That's it. So and the satiety just works, and it works appropriately to keep it gets us each to the point that we need to be for our body weight. So
it's really amazing. And when I first started my journey with LCHF, because I was coming off a background of binge eating and still not knowing how much food was appropriate, I actually was eating about 5,000 or 6,000 calories, but doing a ketogenic sort of low carb approach and still able to lose weight. So it's
incredible, really. I tell you a funny story. I have a dog called Bear who eats kangaroo mince and Philadelphia cream cheese. That's what he
Sounds
gets
like
fed.
A good diet.
It's a good diet. It's a good diet for a dog. He eats. So I calculated how many calories he eats. He eats 1,600 calories a day.
Nice.
And I eat roughly 1,600 calories a day, and I'm 4 times his mass. He's only 26 kilograms, and he won't put on weight. He's a teenager, and we just have different metabolic rates, and we do different things with energy during the day.
Exactly.
And so it's fascinating, and yet he doesn't get the option of a satiety signal. He eats whatever's in the bowl. But my satiety signal is just getting me to the point of where I need to be and just keeping me there. And it's a higher BMI than, you know, ideally if I was to look at BMIs, I might say, I wouldn't mind being down around between 20 and 25. That's not where my satiety wants me to be. So.
Well, that's the thing, because weight loss is great, yes, but what is so much more important, and I think for you as well, is the freedom from food that you get.
Yes.
Like, I was in this dieting cycle where my weight was just never stable and my mind was never stable. All I could think about was how many calories was in a food, what was that food going to do in terms of putting on body weight. All I could think about was just weight and calories. And then now to be able to just be so free from all that. Like yesterday, I didn't eat the whole day. I gave a presentation and my energy was just pumping and like I didn't even think about food. And it was just so amazing because like I know I've been LCHF for quite a while now, but when I originally switched over and started, you know, I would usually binge eat once a day, right? So then when I started to realize that I wasn't binge eating, I was like, my life has changed. Even if I didn't lose weight, it would have just been totally worth it for me.
My brain's working differently now. My relationship to food has changed.
My relationship to food has changed. Like I can so confidently say like my relationship is so good with food right now. And I think I'm a different person too. Like if you asked my family, when I was going through that time, I was not a nice person to be around. Not a nice person.
I'll take your word for it.
But now, like, it's just so different. And I think that is the biggest win when it comes to this type of nutrition. And so I'm never going back to calorie counting, and I would never suggest calorie counting to anyone because I know how toxic it can be.
Well, listeners, that's the considered authority of a dietitian.
100%. 100%.
Tell me about this study that you're working on now. You can't. The results are still embargoed, right?
So that's the systematic review that I did. So I was really lucky, actually. As part of my master's research degree, they let me do my own project.
Right.
So usually what happens is you just tack on to another PhD student that's already doing something. But because I'd been having a lot of meetings with Kieran, every time we spoke to each other, we'd talk about a study we wanted to do.
Right.
And so when it was coming out to my research component, I requested if I could do a study with him. And we decided, well, let's, most people don't think there's any evidence for low carb, or many people don't think there is. So let's review the evidence and let's bring it all together. And we actually found that that's already been done for pretty much everything. So it was already done for type 2, it was already done for obesity.
Yeah.
And well, we're like, we're not really showing anything new. The evidence is already out there. But then we realized there is a massive gap for type 1 diabetes.
Right, yeah.
There is just no research, or there was no high-quality systematic reviews anyway, to guide us in what amount of carbohydrate is optimal for this population,
right?
Where that should be the most important thing. I mean, people with type 1 diabetes, they can't tolerate carbohydrate. It's literally a disease of carbohydrate intolerance.
Yes.
And we haven't got any high-quality systematic reviews looking at the evidence.
Yeah. Wow.
So we're like, yep, we're going to be the first.
Fresh territory.
Yeah.
Lovely,
yeah. So we did a systematic review of all the studies investigating low carbohydrate diets for type 1. And we did our systematic review quite differently to what a lot of people do their systematic reviews like. So instead of just including randomized controlled trials, because we knew there was going to be like no evidence out there, right?
Yeah.
We included every study design. So if it was an N=1 case study, we got it. If it was a pre-post intervention study or a cohort study, observational study, like we knew that the evidence would be scarce. We're like, let's just get everything.
Collect it all up. And you got everything, whether it supported your hypothesis or not.
Oh, yeah. We didn't care.
You wanted to get everything and then put it through the filter and work out where
because
you stood.
I am genuinely interested. I mean, we get taught as dietitians, to sort of go by what the person's already eating.
Right.
So whatever carbohydrate amount they're already eating, try and help them sort of just make it a bit more, I guess, controlled in terms of so that they can calculate their insulin dose properly. So we don't really get taught what the correct dose is. And I'm genuinely interested in finding that out. I mean, I know low carb is so good for so many things, but I also know that there's that sustainability aspect as well. And with type 1s, you can get diagnosed at a very young age.
Right. Yeah.
So it is important to actually have that open mind. And so we went in with an open mind, but we found some pretty amazing results. And I presented some of the studies at the low carb conference in Perth. And, we had a couple of N=1s in there, which is quite fun because we wouldn't have picked those up otherwise if we were doing just an RCT systematic review. So we picked up these N=1 and, one of them that I didn't actually present was Dr. Bernstein.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. His own on himself, yeah.
He published an N=1 on himself in 1980.
But why isn't that in the literature?
Nobody knows about it.
Yeah. So
exactly.
Wonderful,
so we're really excited about the way we did our systematic review because we think it kind of sets a bit of a standard for other people and particularly for areas that aren't well studied.
Yeah.
So, of course, for obesity, you can look at systematic reviews of randomized controlled trials and you can be like, yeah, that's cool. We've got lots of evidence. But for something like type 1 diabetes and carbohydrate restriction, there's no evidence. So you can't just rely on randomized controlled trials anymore.
Right.
As we heard yesterday, there's people out there that need help now. We can't wait for these $1 million randomized controlled trials to be done.
No.
We need to look at everything that we've got. So it was fun that we had some N=1s in there. I loved it because I'm an N=1er myself.
We both are. Yeah.
We both are.
Well, I'm not type 1, neither are you, but I mean, still we're both
but in
a
our
low-carb
own,
diet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Dr. Bernstein's study was really cool. He gave a lot of information about his insulin.
Yes.
And so he was able to reduce his exogenous insulin from 80 units per day, which is quite high, to 25 units per day.
Wow. Yeah.
And the most incredible result was how much his hypoglycemias went down. So he was having, I think he said, I can't remember off the top of my head, it was between 2 and 5 severe hypoglycemic episodes a week.
Wow. I've only ever had one, and it was the scariest. Actually, no, two. The scariest moments of my life, and this was when I was on anti-glycemic drugs. So in the early days, and I was on the high carb diet. The only way I've ever had hypoglycemic events was reactive hypoglycemia on the diet that they give you, with 300 grams of carbs a day.
Oh gosh, yes. Well, I imagine I've never had a hypo, obviously, but I think it would be so scary.
Yeah.
And I've had a few patients actually tell me that they've had hypos in their car, and one of
Which can kill people.
Oh, yeah. So it's incredible. So he got his severe hypoglycemic events down to 2 a year.
Wow.
So amazing. And I mean, there are some amazing results coming out. So the systematic review we did has been provisionally accepted for publishing.
Okay.
So we're really excited. And when that does get published, we're going to spread it around so people can see.
We'll put it in the show notes. In
Fantastic.
fact, if it's pretty soon, we might actually hold back the podcast until it's available.
Yeah.
And we'll put it in the show notes so that everyone can read it, which is awesome.
Awesome.
Oh, thank you very much for spending time with us today. It's been a great interview, and you did a wonderful presentation yesterday. I know it was your first, and you were nervous.
You.
And you were standing in for Dr. Rooney, and you did a wonderful job. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I remember meeting Jessica at Keto Fest Down Under.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. She came and spoke at Keto Fest Down Under. We recorded with her twice. This one that we just replayed, I was actually in Connecticut at the time when we recorded with her. But the second time, she just delivered her presentation at Keto Fest. So, that was good. The other thing about that episode, 112, is the recipe in that episode is beef cheese. Oh, yeah. And you remember, we should let Carl and Richard tell this story, right?
Let's let them do that.
Well, then let's share some recipes! You know what's great about doing that in the studio? Yeah. We have a compressor limiter, so I can scream as loud as I can.
Okay, let's try that compressor out.
All right. Well, I'll go first.
Sure.
Richard and I have a sort of a 1-2 punch that goes together, and it came from experience. And mine is a braised beef cheek. So we were on our way to Restaurant Depot to shop for Keto Mini Fest just a couple of days ago, and I thought we would stop at this meat packing place, Westerly Meat Packing, because they have chicken skins, and we were planning on doing chicken skin crackers.
Yeah, how many? It was like $10 for like 2 kilos
pounds.
or something. $10.
$1 a pound, yeah. So, but they had other meats and stuff, and so, what the heck? Let's check them out.
Sure.
And Richard sees the beef cheek. He says, "Oh, we got to have that."
So good.
So, beef cheek obviously is the cheek, the jowl of a cow or a steer.
Yeah.
And it's very kind of tough because it gets
Rubbery.
a lot of work.
Yeah, well, this is the muscle on a cow that works all the time.
Yeah.
I think for we know for mammals, the lower leg is also working a lot because they're standing and walking all the time. So, shanks are delicious and the lower leg is a delicious part of the animal.
But you got to cook them low and slow.
You do. And it's the same with the cheeks is continually moving the jaws to chew the cud. Yeah. And, when you think about it, the buttery parts of a cow are the muscles that do no work.
Right.
This is the
tenderloin.
fillet and tenderloin, But it's the ones that do all of the work that are the tastiest.
Yeah. So we're going to do this low and slow, and this is a braising method that works with any kind of tough meat. This beef cheek was just amazing, and it had really nice fat when it melted. Now, we did it in an Instapot.
We did.
So, but I've done this method with other tough meats, and it works really, really well. So what you're going to do is preheat your oven to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, you can go anywhere between that and 325, but if you want to do it low and slow, 250 is good.
Right.
So you want to salt and pepper your beef cheeks, maybe 2 to 3 pounds. It's whatever it comes in. Now you're going to make a mirepoix. So chop up 2 stalks of celery, 1 small onion. If you want a few carrots in there for flavor, that's okay. Yeah. But, just watch carrots. 2 bell peppers, or capsicum in Australia, 4 cloves of garlic, some thyme, and chop all that stuff up. Now, you coat the bottom of a Dutch oven, and we use these Lodge cast iron Dutch ovens. They're great.
From Lodge, yeah.
Lodge, yeah. Coat the bottom of the Dutch oven with olive oil, and then you put it on high heat on the stovetop and get that smoking hot. And now you're going to sear the beef cheek on all sides until it's caramelized. It's about 3 minutes per side.
Yeah.
You want to get a nice crust on it.
This is actually for the flavor.
Yeah.
Because this is the
Maillard reaction.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. So now you want to deglaze the pan with about a half a cup of dry red wine. And, scrape all the bits off the bottom if you got any.
Yeah.
Now add your veggies. Saute that up for about 4 minutes. Not a whole lot of time. And just place the beef cheek right on top of those veggies. Now you're going to put the cover on and cook that 250 for at least 5 hours. We did it in an Instapot in 2 hours, and it was still a little bit tough. It should have gone another 3.
If you use an Instant Pot, take it out after 2 hours, and try and stick a fork through it. And if the fork doesn't just slide in, if it meets some resistance, put it in for another hour. And what happens is all of that sort of connective tissue turns into gelatin. It's delicious.
Yeah, and the same way with slow braising. If you can't stick a fork in it, just leave it in for a while.
Back in again.
Yeah. At that low temperature, it's going to just not 6-7 hours doesn't really matter.
Right.
Yeah. So now you want to take it out of the oven, remove the beef, and allow it to rest tented, meaning that you put some foil over it to keep it warm for about 5 minutes. And for what to do next, I give you Richard Morris.
So what I suggested we do is make a sauce called a beurre monté, which is montéing is a process of sort of adding fat to a hot sauce to make it glisten and thicken it slightly. And the French have this technique called beurre monté, which is using a butter monté. And it's essentially the trick is you can make a beurre monté with just water and butter. You put a little bit of boiling water on a pan. You take the temperature down so that it's no longer quite boiling, and then you whisk in little cubes of cold butter. And what happens is you end up with a thickened sauce.
And the water keeps it from burning, and that's the trick.
Right.
As it evaporates off, that butter just melts and it's delicious.
Yeah, and this is a technique that we saw Robert Ramsey doing at RD86.
Yeah, last night.
So what we did was we took all of the juices that came off the beef and the beef cheeks and all of the vegetables, and we put them in a blender.
Yep, magic bullet.
And we basically blitzed it to turn the vegetables. These vegetables have been cooking for 2 hours, so they just disappeared into nothing.
Yeah. So it became a little bit like a soup.
Yeah, and it was quite watery still because we'd added a little bit of water into the mixture to loosen it a bit. So what happens then is we added some cold butter cubes. So we cut cold butter into cubes and we added them to the blender and we blitzed it.
Yeah.
And this is the same technique. We're going to put links in the show notes of techniques for making beurre monté, but by adding butter, the butter thickened the sauce.
Right.
And so it was like, what would you call it? It was like, it felt like it had a gelatin in it.
Like a gravy texture almost. And so when you do this, you want to do it at the very end of the process, right before you're going to serve it.
Yeah.
And what Robert did last night was he actually added this beurre monté to the mirepoix soup mixture.
Stock, yeah.
That was really reduced, so it was really thick. And then he took the pork shanks, which we had for dinner last night, and just sort of swirled the butter around with it, and it just made this glistening, thick gravy.
Wasn't it good?
It was delicious.
Yeah. So, but when we did beef cheeks, that was also delicious. The gravy was the best part of the beef cheek.
Absolutely.
So, this is all of the flavors coming out in the sauce, and then it's just the texture of the beef. Once that all of that connective tissue in the beef turns into gelatin, it's like taking it's like taking a mouthful of I guess it's like gelatinous.
Yeah, it's
food,
like jelly,
and
almost.
It just coats the outside of your mouth. It's absolutely delicious,
and it breaks down just the right level. You don't have to chew it. Yeah. It's just delicious.
Exactly.
Heard you say you're due for a little. Need a little time.
Well, that's a show. Hey, thanks for listening.
We hope you get as much out of this information as we do in putting it together.
Two Keto Dudes doesn't take ad revenue. We have no benefactors with hidden agendas.
That's right. It's listeners like you who keep our lights on.
And there are a few ways that you can support us, all of which are listed on our website at support.2keto.com.
Thanks again.
And we'll see you next time on Two Keto Dudes.